All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Success Connection workshop on study skills for success. My name is Scott Sutherland, and I am the Capico coordinator here at Windward Community College. And in my position, I oversee a few academic support services, which include tutoring, supplemental instruction or embedded tutoring, testing services, as well as tech support. As a reminder, this workshop is a part of the UH Success Connection Workshop Series, which is a collaboration between all of the UHCC campuses. This started as a Leeward Community College initiative and has continued as a system-wide collaboration since fall of 2021. We'll also be sharing the link for future Success Connection workshop toward the end of the presentation, as well as throughout. So you can look for that in the chat box. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So we want to remind you or do some quick housekeeping reminders before we get started. We encourage you to turn on your video throughout the presentation so that we know who our audience is. However, we'll leave that decision up to you if you want to decide to turn your video on or keep it off. We understand either way. We would love to answer your questions, so feel free to put any questions that you have into the chat box at any time and we'll be sure to respond. We'll also leave some time at the end of the presentation for Q&A if you'd like to wait until then. As I mentioned, we'll be recording this session for future use so that others can benefit from Success Connection workshops. And finally, if your instructor is providing you with extra credit for your attendance today, please make sure to complete our feedback form and indicate who your instructor is, because we'll need to contact them to let them know that you attended. And then also, I have a study skills guide that summarizes this presentation, and I'd like to share it with everyone here after the presentation. So if you make sure to complete our feedback form, I'll be sure to follow up and provide you with that guide. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So here's our agenda for today's presentation. We'll start off with some introductions, perhaps learn a little bit about you all, and then we'll describe the study cycle, which is an effective and ideal way to study based on research. Next, we'll talk about study preparation, which includes your study environment, creating a study plan, and setting goals for studying. And finally, we'll talk about two highly effective study strategies, which are distributed practice and active recall. So first, let's start with some introductions. We'll introduce ourselves first. So my name is Scott Sutherland, and I, again, am the Capico coordinator here at WCC. But I wanted to introduce one of our Capico mentors here, Bethany. So Bethany, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Bethany Sen. I do supplemental instruction and I am a peer mentor at Windward Community College. I am majoring in English and religious studies. And one thing that I do to study is definitely just trying to follow the study cycle and making sure that I'm hitting like all 5 of those steps, which we'll definitely get into today.
Awesome. And so we probably don't have time to have everyone introduce themselves, but if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat box, we'd really appreciate it. So if you could tell us your first name, your home campus, what you're majoring in, and one thing you currently do to study, and then we'll see where we are from there. So if you wouldn't mind, please introduce yourself in the chat box. Hi, Rich. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Haley. Hi, Mahina. Has the same majors as you, Bethany. Hi, Ashley. Hi, Kiani. All right. Thanks, everyone, for introducing yourself into the chat box. Feel free to continue. Hi, Amanda. For now, though, I'm going to continue on with my presentation. It's great to learn a little bit about everyone here today. And this slide just has my overall message for today's presentation, which is that effective studying equals effective utilization of the study cycle plus study preparation plus using effective study strategies such as active recall and distributive practice. So we'll go into all of these components. So the first thing that we're going to do is jump into the study cycle and its 5 stages. So I'm going to have Bethany take over here and describe the study cycle for you.
Yeah, so what we're looking at here is the study cycle, as Scott mentioned. The study cycle was developed by Frank Christ and describes the ideal study cycle for students. The cycle really emphasizes the importance of learning as the course progresses, as opposed to studying and memorizing information right before a quiz or exam or otherwise trying to cram information. And of course, this is a much more efficient and effective way for us to learn. So just really briefly, the steps are going to be previewing before the class, attending the course and participating in the class, reviewing class material and your notes after the class, of course, practicing good study habits, and then assessing whether your strategies are working or not and making any changes if needed. And we have a little poll for you. So we want you guys to respond to which parts of the cycle do you regularly perform and which do you notice you may tend to skip. So we'll have you follow the directions on the screen here, and then we'll present your guys' responses.
So if you wouldn't mind going to slido.com and in the box where it asks which poll you're responding to, enter the number 8010570. And then we'll see how you all respond.
Zero 10570.
Correct.
010 570. What's this?
All right, we have some responses coming through. Thank you. Feel free to continue. All right, I still see responses coming through, so thank you. All right, it looks like we have quite a few responses. And so what we're noticing here is that a lot of you attend class, which is extremely important in terms of the study cycle. That's how you will get most of your material or know which material you need to study in order to succeed. And then a lot of you are also doing the study part, which is super important. That's why we're here today, to learn how to improve our study skills. And then it looks like the remaining 5, a lot less of you are doing. So that is the review portion, the preview portion, and then the least amount of you are doing assessing your study strategies, which is okay, because a big part of what we're here to do today is assess your study strategies and see whether what you're currently doing is effective and whether implementing what we'll describe will help you in the future. All right, so I'm going to have Bethany go back into describing the study cycle for you.
Yeah, so we're going to start with the first step, which is previewing before class, and really putting emphasis on previewing before. So the purpose of doing this is to preview the course material and to get a sense of the big picture of the material that will be covered. And then once you develop a big picture of the material, it's a lot easier to learn and kind of remember details as you go. So it's important to remember that the study cycle begins even before you attend class. And, it's just really important to be previewing this material. Some sample activities of how you can do this is to be skimming through readings, such as just looking at the headings, the vocabulary, or maybe discussion questions that you'll be prompted to answer later in the week. You can review the instructor's slideshows if those are accessible to you, as well as possibly writing down questions that you have about the material, which can be really great because then you'll already have things that maybe you want to bring up before attending and have that accessible when you're in class. All right, and the second step is to attend class, which it seems like you all are doing pretty well at already. I think to a lot of people, this can seem like a no-brainer, but there are also a lot of people that think that they can succeed really well in class without attending, which can be really difficult. So it's important to be attending class regularly, because it's a really critical part of the study cycle, and not just to be attending, but making sure you're really participating actively by listening, using good note-taking strategies, which we'll talk about in a minute, and also asking any questions, collaborating with classmates, and just really making the most of the class time. All right, so speaking of notes, it's good to be practicing good note-taking skills. This can look a little bit different for everybody, but something that we recommend is Cornell note-taking methods. So taking notes can help you to focus on the material, which is really important, and structuring your notes so that you can refer to them later is really important too, because class notes are a very important form of study material for you later on. So you want to be considerate of the format of your notes, whether this is handwritten or digital. Handwriting notes helps you to remember information more, but digital notes are a little bit easier to organize. So kind of just knowing what works well for you, maybe trying both and seeing what you prefer. And Cornell notes, a lot of you guys are probably familiar with already, but that consists of outlining, concept mapping, and it focuses on kind of noting main points instead of the entire presentation. And you want to be doing that too, even if it's not Cornell notes, but just kind of knowing which main points to focus in on. We have a little example of it here on the right, and then we'll also watch a brief video about it as well to give you guys some more information.
The Cornell note-taking system was made popular by Walter Pauck, an education professor at Cornell University. Cornell notes are helpful in class, while reading textbooks, and when using online resources. Start by labeling your page, then divide it into 3 sections: notes, cues, and summary. No matter where you're using them, the basic idea behind Cornell notes is that you have a place to write down facts, write down questions, and summarize what you've learned. The Cornell Notes format allows your brain to work in several different ways, so it can help you understand and retain information. The format is more flexible than you might think. Try out different aspects of this system and see what works for you.
All right, so that was like a really brief overview of Cornell Notes, which is one highly effective method for note-taking. But as Bethany mentioned, note-taking is a very personalized thing and it looks different for everyone. So we really encourage you to play with different styles and see what really works for you, what helps you to remember or recall the information from class, which notes are organized in a way that you can easily study from and understand. So this is not the only method, but it is one effective method. So again, we encourage you to try out different methods.
Yeah, and I would say on that note too, I think in my experience, definitely different note-taking methods can be beneficial depending on the class or what you're taking notes on. So also just kind of seeing what works best for the specific material that you're working with. Okay, so step 3 is to review after class. You want to revisit your notes soon after class, preferably within a day, just because you want to go through everything while it's still somewhat fresh in your mind and before you've forgotten too much of what you went over. So you can revisit your notes by rereading, reorganizing, especially I think during class, sometimes we're just jotting down ideas really quickly, but maybe not in an organized manner. So this can be a really good time to go back and do that. You can fill in any gaps in knowledge or material maybe that you missed. And you can also note questions that you have about the material. Like we just watched in the Cornell Notes video, using that type of note-taking, it also gives you like a really good organized section to be kind of adding any questions that you might have and addressing those. This is really important because it all helps move short-term memory into long-term memory. And something great about this is if you're doing it correctly and, kind of getting comfortable with it through practice, it can be done in as quick as 10 minutes. It doesn't need to take a large portion of your day or your study time. All right, and step 4 is actually studying the material. But I think a lot of people might wonder, how exactly do we do this? So you want to plan and schedule study time. You want to decide what it is that you're going to study and space that out over time, again, to avoid any cramming. And it's great to be setting SMART goals for your studying. So you want to ask yourself, what do I want to accomplish during the study session? And that can help a lot in really helping to see through that you're accomplishing what you're seeking to get done. You want to be using intense and intentional study sessions. This could be 30, 45, or 50 minutes. And I think this part is really important because I think as a student, there's kind of this misconception that to be studying effectively, it needs to be taking a lot of time, but it really doesn't if you're just being really intentional about how you're using the time. And especially if you're using, interactive material and using active recall strategies, which is really important. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. You want to relax. This can be taking some breaks between study sessions, maybe grabbing a snack, taking a walk, playing a game, whatever this might look like for you, but giving yourself some time to rest in between. And you want to review the material again to see if it's stuck. All right, and lastly, for the 5th step in the study cycle, and one that it sounds like a lot of us might skip, this is a really important step, and honestly, maybe one of the easier ones. So it's kind of good if we can kind of just add this in there. It might really improve some of our studying. I know this is one that I tend to skip a little bit, and it's really good to kind of remember to be doing this regularly. So it's important to assess yourself and assess whether the strategies you've been using have been effective for you. So you can ask yourself if you've been reaching the SMART goals that you've been setting for your studying sessions. Reflect upon if you know the material well enough to be able to teach it or explain it to others. And also kind of think about, what is my previous performance like on exams, quizzes, etc. Should I change my approach? Also consider, are there strategies I haven't used that might work better? And this whole part of the study cycle is just kind of keeping in mind, it's all very personalizable to you. You want to kind of see what's working well for you, make any changes. Even if it's something that's, recommended, but that it just doesn't work well for you in your system, you want to just find what is going to work best for you, whether that's with note-taking methods or something else. Just make any adjustments as needed and feel comfortable, making changes as needed and not feeling the need to stick with something if it's not working.
All right. Thanks, Bethany, for previewing the study cycle for us. I hope learning about those 5 steps can help you in kind of thinking about your studying and planning for your studying. And speaking of planning, we also want to talk to you about study preparation, because this is also really important. So some things you want to consider are your study environment. So as a student, you're going to spend a lot of time studying. And so it's important that you want to make sure you have a study environment that is both comfortable and productive for you. Everyone has really different preferences in this area, particularly. Some people like complete silence when they're studying. I, however, cannot study like that, so I need some background noise. So it's important to identify your personal distractors and what actually helps you study, and to minimize those distractions if at all possible. So some things you might commonly consider regarding your study environment are the space in which you study, whether it is tidy, whether it is organized, and even where this space is for you. Again, you'll also want to consider noise, whether you need some noise, whether you need no noise at all, or whether the environment you're in just has the wrong kind of noise for studying. A lot of us get distracted by electronics, myself included. So, consider silencing or muting your phone, putting your phone on do not disturb, or even just moving your phone away from you so that you won't be able to see the notifications as they come in. And same thing with TV and laptops and other devices like that. Lighting is also really important for studying and something we don't really consider often. So make sure you're thinking about that, as well as climate of the space you're in, and comfort, because if we're uncomfortable, it's very unlikely that studying is going to go well. And then other people too. Other people can be both a benefit to your study or a distraction, depending on who they are and how they're contributing. So you just want to be mindful of who you're including in your study space. And then there are other things you just may want to consider that can help you to focus. Things like inspiration, surrounding yourself with things that inspire you. You might want to have some scent around, whether that's a candle, incense, rosemary, and then other things like hunger and thirst, because again, hunger and thirst are things that will distract you from studying. And so making sure that those needs are met is really important. So if you wouldn't mind, while I'm continuing to talk, would you be able to maybe describe your ideal study environment in the chat box? And then we'll kind of see what those responses look like. All right, and then I'm going to move on to our next slide. So in addition to considering your study environment, you also may want to consider creating a study plan. So a study plan will help you just kind of map out the content that you want to study in manageable chunks, because again, like we said, cramming is not a really effective way for studying. So you really want to make sure you're spacing your studying out. And the best way to do that is by creating a study plan. So we've identified 4 steps that you can take to create a study plan. First, you want to look at the material that you have for your upcoming exam and break it down into manageable chunks or groups. And you can think about that in a number of different ways, whether that is by chapter, module, week, whatever makes sense for the course that you're taking. And then it's really helpful to decide how long you would like to spend studying each chunk or group. So you might set a time of 2 hours per group, or an hour per unit, whatever works or you think will work for you. And then you'll want to decide what study materials and tools or what environment you need. And then you want to write it down, because writing it down is an effective way to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to the plans that we create. I'm going to put into the chat box a study plan template that you can perhaps refer to if you want to. You might find it's a useful thing to help you map out your study plans. All right, and then we mentioned SMART goals. The reason we specifically mentioned SMART goals is because it helps you to really measure and track your progress. So these goals will not only help you to narrow down what you study, they also help focus your study time, stay accountable, and help determine if you're studying effectively. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with SMART goals, but it's an acronym. The acronym is specific, measurable, actionable or attainable, realistic, and timely. So for specific, it's what specifically do I want to accomplish? Measurable is how will I know that I've accomplished the goal? Actionable is what actions do I need to take? Realistic is a determination that you make about how realistic is it that you'll accomplish this goal. So we want to make sure we're setting realistic goals and not setting ourselves up for failure. So for instance, completing 100 problems in 10 minutes is not realistic. So that would not be a realistic SMART goal to set. And then finally, timely, this one is really critical. You want to make sure you have a time frame for accomplishing your goal, because this is the part that will really help you stay accountable. So I'm going to give you a few examples on the next slide. So I've included 2 at the top. So an example for a SMART goal for studying might be, by the end of this study session, which I've identified as 45 minutes, I will be able to compare and contrast the 7 main perspectives in psychology. And so we know that that's a really good SMART goal, because it's very specific in what we're studying, the 7 main perspectives in psychology. It's measurable because we know when we've accomplished it, because we've accomplished it when we're able to compare and contrast those 7 perspectives. It's actionable because we know what actions we would need to take to accomplish this. This is fairly realistic, just given, I think, the amount of material we'd be working on. And then timely, For this goal, we've set by the end of this 45-minute study session. So that's our time frame, and that will help us to stay focused for those 45 minutes. And then a second example might be, by the end of this study session, I will be able to solve 10 different practice problems on linear equations and inequalities. So again, that is specific, it's measurable, where we're going to complete 10 problems. That is fairly realistic, so complete 10 problems in a study session. And it's timely. So again, that will help keep us on track and productive. So definitely consider making SMART goals a part of your study plan, because it can really help you, again, stay focused and on task. Another thing that's really useful and important with regard to studying is making effective note cards and flashcards. So this is a study strategy that many of us use and is actually highly effective. However, in order to make them the most effective that they can be, you'll want to follow these kind of rules and steps. And some of these are also just things to remember. So flashcards can be handwritten or digital, but depending on your preference. We'll provide a resource for digital note cards. It's really helpful to mix pictures with words because images are more easily remembered than words. Our mind can make associations with pictures more easily. A useful strategy is to include mnemonic devices, which help you make connections between pieces of information. So a mnemonic device is something like PEMDAS, if you're familiar with that, which is an acronym for the order of operations. So it stands for parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and then subtraction. So that's the order in which you would solve an equation in math. So definitely consider those types of things, mnemonic devices that will help you to memorize information or steps. This one is really important. Only include one fact per note card to highlight really key information. And so you might have a concept that has many facts as part of it, and you want to break down those complicated or complex concepts into multiple questions or note cards that can be answered. Another really helpful strategy that some of us may not even think about is to say your answers out loud before you flip them over and look at your response. There is this effect where we, we think we know the answer in our brains, but once we actually test ourselves, we actually don't know the information. So this is one of those things that will help you to make sure you know the information before moving on. And then finally, another really helpful tip is to make sure you study your flashcards in both directions to build bidirectional neural pathways. So, sometimes we'll just study the definition and then we won't be able to do the opposite. If we get the definition, we won't be able to identify the term. And so that's why it's important to study in both directions on flashcards. Another really useful strategy is to create practice tests. So, your instructor may not always provide you with a study guide or a practice test that can help you determine exactly what's on the exam. So we highly recommend creating your own practice test and then practice by taking that test yourself and seeing if you can respond to all the questions. So in order to do that, you would want to use things like, or classroom materials like study guides that you receive from the instructor, any notes that you take on their lectures. Your textbook obviously is a great source of information, as well as the instructor's slides and any recorded lectures that you have access to. And then just some things to know about developing the questions that might be asked on an exam is to make the questions that you write as challenging as possible. That way, you won't be surprised by the difficulty of the questions being asked on the test. And then, of course, to test yourself by doing the test. That's really important. That's the active recall component. All right, we also have visual tools that can help you organize information and help you display information in a way that will help you to memorize or understand it. So creating the visual tool is an active recall strategy in and of itself. and it helps you see the connections between different concepts that you might be studying in your class. So here are 3 examples of visuals. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are three useful types that you might find useful in your courses. So the first is mind map or mind mapping. You can see that in the bottom left-hand corner here. And this is just a way of visually organizing information, seeing connections between different concepts. And then we have Venn diagrams here. Again, Venn diagrams help with comparing and contrasting, and also finding, comparing, contrasting, 2 different concepts. And then finally at the bottom, we have timelines. Timelines are really helpful for mapping things out chronologically. And this can be helpful if you need to see the change over time, the cause and effect of something, or even just to note the significance of an event. So definitely consider creating visual tools if you think those will be beneficial. All right, so I mentioned digital flashcards, but there are also other apps and tools that you can use for studying. So these can help you either create study tools or practice active recall. So here are 3 on the screen specifically that we wanted to mention. Quizlet is a great one for creating and studying digital study materials. So this is a website where you can create the digital flashcards, practice exams, or you can even just enter in information and the Quizlet will create a game or a study strategy for you. So that's another great benefit for using Quizlet. Khan Academy is a nonprofit that produces lots of short video lessons. Their website also includes practice problems and materials for educators. This is a really great resource for, I think, math, as well as other problem-solving types of courses. Again, because of that supplementary practice problems and the video lessons that they provide. And then this one down here, Go Conquer, allows you to create virtual mind maps, flashcards, quizzes, and notes. You can also create groups, discuss topics, share resources, and do other collaborative things on that website. So these are just some. If you're aware of any others, would you mind putting those into the chat box? Because we'd love to add to our list of study tools. Okay. And then one more tool that I wanted to mention is the Pomodoro timer. So what the Pomodoro technique is a technique for spacing out your studying so that you're not, sorry, let me back up. It is spacing out your studying for the most effective learning possible. Because what we know is that when folks try to study for too long, they're just not absorbing the material in the most effective and efficient way. And so what we know about people is that our attention spans are fairly short. And so what we should do is study for a set amount of time, take a break, and then come back to studying and continue that cycle throughout our studying. So the Pomodoro timer is typically 25 minutes. So you'll work for 25 minutes or study for 25 minutes, take a short 5-minute break that kind of helps you absorb the material and reset your mind. It also is a good time to kind of reward yourself for studying or for taking the time to work on this. And you can do that by having a snack or watching a short 1-minute video on your phone, something like that. So we highly recommend this as well. And then finally, this is my favorite one. One of the most effective ways to know if you have mastered something or understand something really well is if you can teach it or explain it to others. And so this is why studying with other people can be really beneficial if you're doing it in the right way. So when you study with others and collaborate, you're providing everyone the opportunity to teach or explain the material to one another. And what's really important here is that when you're teaching or explaining to one another, that you're doing it out loud, because that really helps you to know whether you understand the material well. Again, I really want to encourage you to study with others, whether that's with a tutor or a group that you've put together, and think of ways where you can each kind of become the teacher or become the explainer within your group for a short period of time. All right, and then to do that, you could create a peer study group, recruit some of your friends, or utilize tutoring. Tutors are a great sounding board or collaborators for study sessions because they can provide you with opportunities to demonstrate your knowledge or practice becoming the teacher. And obviously, they're very knowledgeable, so that would be an effective way to study with another person. Speaking of tutoring resources, we want to remind you that all UH Community College students have access to tutor.com, and they provide 24/7 tutoring. How many hours you'll receive is based on your campus, but you can access them via hawaii.edu/tutor. And they have asynchronous tutoring for all kinds of subjects in a variety of different things. We also highly recommend taking advantage of your campus's tutoring services. Whatever your campus is, I'm sure there's a tutoring service available on your campus. So here at WCC, we have Kapiko Services, which provides writing tutoring, math tutoring, and we also have Trio SSS, which provides course-based tutoring. And then we mentioned taking care of yourself, which is really important. So we mentioned breaks, taking those periodic breaks from studying and giving yourself small rewards, such as a short walk, a nap, or a snack. Really want to emphasize getting enough sleep regularly because we know that that improves academic performance and concentration. And one of our tips here is don't pull all-nighters. This was something that took me a few years to learn in college. And so it wasn't until I would say my second half of college that I really got into the habit of sleep and putting myself through the study cycle in an effective way. And then self-care, it's really important to take time away from school after studying to do activities that you enjoy that will help you reduce your stress and improve your well-being. Okay, so you've heard me mention these two topics pretty frequently throughout today's session, distributed practice and active recall. So we're going to get into those two strategies now. So distributed practice is really, really key. And we've mentioned several times up until this point that one of the biggest mistakes students make in studying is cramming. And the reason for that is because information is less likely to stick in your brain because it hasn't moved into your long-term memory. In order to move information into your long-term memory, you need to do that active recall process over a period of time to make sure it's solidified in your brain. Also, cramming is not as effective because your brain needs rest time in between studying to process information. And that's where things like the Pomodoro timer come into play, and doing those intentional, shorter study sessions over longer periods of time. And then finally, cramming can just lead us to feeling overwhelmed and stressed. And when we're overwhelmed and stressed, our brains don't work as effectively as they do otherwise. So as much as we can minimize those things, that would be better for learning and for studying. And so instead of cramming, what you want to aim for is this distributed practice. And I'll talk more about that. So distributed practice is where learning, studying, and practicing the material in your class occurs over multiple sessions over a longer period of time. So instead of pulling an all-nighter and cramming for 8 hours consecutively, it's better to study for 45 minutes per day for the 10 days leading up to the exam, because research shows that this is better for long-term learning. And similar research indicates that when study time is exactly equal, students who use distributed practice learn and retain more than those who do longer cramming style study sessions. So with that in mind, we want to say plan out your studying using a study plan so that you're ensuring distributed practice. Okay, so that's distributed practice. And then we have active recall. Active recall is actively stimulating your memory to recall information. And active recall is different than recognition, which is, oh, I've seen this concept before. I can recognize it in a test. And so we want to avoid simple recognition of concepts and really aim to actively recall information from our memory. So active recall in studying is a principle of efficient learning. Using these types of strategies is more effective and efficient than passive review and recognition. So some examples of passive review and recognition are just rereading your notes, rereading the textbook, rewatching the lecture, just highlighting the textbook or reading, or just taking notes. That's passive review. And then recognition would be things like matching questions and multiple choice questions, where you're just identifying the most correct answer of a group of options. And so instead of passive recall and recognition, we want to aim for active recall strategies. And that's things like note cards and flashcards, creating and taking practice tests, creating those visual tools, like I mentioned, mind maps, Venn diagrams, and timelines, testing yourself out loud, or joining a study group and kind of testing each other out loud. And then finally, predicting and answering potential exam questions is also a great active recall strategy. So really consider, if you are doing some of the passive review recognition types of studying, to move more toward active recall strategies. Okay, so I've talked to you a lot about a bunch of different topics: active recall, distributed practice, your study environment, and how you can prepare to study. So kind of let's put it all together and watch this short video on the 9 best scientific study tips.
Time for school, and it's no surprise that many of us are determined to study smarter instead of longer. But which study tips and tricks actually work scientifically and can help you get those perfect grades? First up, research shows that study sessions are most effective in small, short chunks. Instead of cramming in a 10-hour study session, it's much more effective to spread it out into 20, 30-minute sessions over a few weeks. This is because your brain is better at encoding information into the synapses in short, repeated sessions as opposed to one large one. And this is why even learning different skills, whether it's swimming, tennis, or a singing lesson, often follows this same format. And while cramming and pulling all-nighters may be a ritual, it turns out that this is linked to the lowest grades. After prolonged nocturnal study sessions, reasoning and memory may be negatively affected for up to 4 whole days. Instead, setting up specific times in a day or during the week just to study primes your brain by creating a routine, and over time, studying actually becomes easier as your brain is trained to learn in those moments. And while many of us spend hours passively rereading our notes or highlighting a textbook, studies have shown this to be ineffective. It doesn't improve your understanding of topics, nor does it link key concepts together. It can even be detrimental as it draws your attention to less important information. Flashcards, on the other hand, are proven to be excellent memory reinforcement tools, whether during your scheduled study times or during off times like a bus ride home. It also helps to have a specific goal for each study session. Instead of aimlessly studying, pick one aspect you'll focus on, whether it's balancing chemical equations or learning how to conjugate French verbs. If you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough. In studies where individuals were asked to learn a passage and then half were told that they would be tested on the material while the other half were told they would have to teach it to other students, participants expecting to teach it did much better at understanding the main points. When you're expecting to teach, your brain organizes the information in a more logical, coherent structure. Of course, practice, practice, practice. Not only do practice tests put your brain in the environment, but even if you make mistakes, they help identify gaps in your knowledge. Practice tests have also been shown to increase confidence, thereby leading to better performance. So, where should you be studying? Research shows that having a designated sacred spot for study that's well equipped with every tool you might need is best. Just like setting times, this primes your brain for studying. Have an awesome study playlist? Not so fast. While some studies have shown that certain types of classical music can help improve concentration, a recent study has shown that learning with rhythmic background noise can be detrimental to focus, and those not using music fared much better. And if you haven't already, put away your phone. This is a no-brainer, but your texts and social media notifications severely decrease concentration. Of course, exams can be extremely stressful, so if you want some tips on how to deal with exam anxiety, check out our ASAP Thought video, which breaks down some tips for that. Link in the description.
All right. So hopefully that video kind of helped put a lot of the information that we've presented today all together in more of a fun way. But again, these are all scientific study tips that we know help students learn and study better. So we hope you'll take some of the information we've shared with you today and apply it to your future studies. So to summarize the material that we've covered today, we want you to really start practicing the study cycle and following that to ensure that you're maintaining good habits and making studying as effective and efficient as possible. On top of following the study cycle, we want you to do some study prep. So that involves creating a study plan, setting up your study environment, and then creating your study materials. So that would be your study guides, practice tests, and note cards. And then once you've done those two things, you want to practice those effective study strategies, so which are the distributed practice and the active recall. So again, making sure that you're doing distributed practice, spacing your study sessions out over time, and studying in shorter study sessions. And then using the study tools that you've created during the study prep time and using those, combining those with active recall strategies, which would be testing yourself, answering out loud, and then looking for opportunities to teach and explain the material to others. Okay, so that's pretty much our message today and what we wanted to share with you. Before we wrap up today, we want to know very briefly, based on what you've learned today, do you have any plans to study differently moving forward? And if so, how? So again, I'm going to ask you to go to slido.com, the same link we used before, number 8010570, and let us know one thing or more than one thing that you will do differently moving forward now that you've learned about this material. So let's take a minute or two and see what kinds of responses we get. All right, we have one response. I am planning on starting to practice teaching the material, and also I will adjust my note cards to make sure that there is only one key fact. Great, so those are two great strategies that I think will be really beneficial to you. Going to study in smaller or little bursts rather than all at one time. Excellent. So that will help you avoid cramming and help you do that distributed practice that we talked about. Get more sleep. Yes, please. It's really important, not just for how we feel and our own well-being, but literally our performance on tests and exams can depend on the quality and amount of sleep that we get. I will attend more/all of my classes so I don't miss out on any info. Great. We learned a lot during class. Incorporate burst study sessions. Making practice tests is a great strategy, as we mentioned. And the Pomodoro timer. Yes, great. Move my phone away from me when studying. Great. Review flashcards and in both directions. I'm glad you picked up on that. And sleep. Organize my notes after class. Great. Give myself a better studying environment and self-care. Awesome. All right. Excellent. Those are all great strategies. I'm glad you picked up on those as we've gone through our presentation today. So with that, we actually want to wrap up our session today. So I wanted to check before we move on further, does anyone have any questions that they wanted to answer? You can feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat box. Yeah, any questions?
I had a question.
All right, what's your question?
Generally, like how much time should you study per credit? I know it depends on the class, but how much is the recommended amount of time to study per credit? Like if you have 12 credits.
Oh, interesting question. I don't know if I have like a specific amount of time that I would recommend per credit. Like you said, I think it depends on the course that you're taking because some courses will require more studying than others. But I would say if you are doing the study cycle pretty regularly, you could probably study for, I don't know, maybe like, how many courses are you taking?
It's 4.
4 classes. Yeah, and obviously it'll depend on when your exams are, when your quizzes are. But if you're studying a few hours per course that you're taking per week, I would think that that would be a good amount to retain the material, especially if you're doing the distributed practice and using those active recall strategies. I think you could probably study a few hours a week per class and do well that way.
Thank you. I think it's just like a lot of I speak on behalf of my cohort when we're just trying to find time to study and trying to manage time and work and family. So it becomes difficult to not cram in a sense, I guess.
Definitely. Yeah.
To try not to.
Yeah, and sometimes cramming is unavoidable if we don't have time throughout our weeks and our days to do more distributed practice. But what I will say is that if you are a part of a cohort, then I really would emphasize and want to highlight group study and finding opportunities for you to study together as a group and really practice teaching and explaining to others, especially out loud, because that can also help you identify gaps in your knowledge. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that if you're a part of a cohorted group where you're all in similar or the same courses, to really try and study together if possible.
Thank you, Scott.
No problem. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for all of your attention today. As we wrap up, I just wanted to share that we do have future Success Connection workshops at the link that I'm putting into the chat box right now. And we would love to see you at those future workshops. So please RSVP for those. And then finally, we've been putting our feedback form in the chat throughout the workshop. But if you'd like to, if you wouldn't mind, please provide us some feedback so that we can improve our workshops in the future. And then I'll know who to send my study guide, my study skills guide to after this workshop. One thing, please do not use this QR code. Please use the link in the chat box. I just realized myself that I did not update the QR code with the correct link. So please use the link in the chat box to complete our survey. All right. So with that, I just want to say mahalo everyone for your attention today. We really appreciate your attendance at our Success Connection workshop. And we hope to see you at future workshops. So mahalo and have a great day and a wonderful spring break.
Mahalo, Scott.